Hi there and welcome to this video on Desc or giving feedback. Desc is a really powerful tool for letting somebody know what you'd like them to do more of, less of or differently to enhance their performance. It's a very simple 4-step process which follows the describe, express, specify and consequences model, DESC. Let's start with describe. It's really important in the first step that you describe an instance that you have observed. Feedback cannot be third party. Somebody said they saw you is feedback around maybe a situation but not around an individual's performance. For example, they saw you doing something you shouldn't have been doing. That's a very different thing to I observed you doing something you shouldn't be doing. If somebody saw you, you're exploring that situation. And it's the same with feedback. You're either giving feedback or you're exploring a situation. Desc is about giving feedback. In which case, I must start with an I statement. I observed you. I saw you. I noticed that. So let's use an example of somebody in a meeting who seems to talk over or interrupt others or start secondary conversations. It's very simple with describe. In the meeting, I saw you discussing certain points with the person sat next to you whilst Trevor was going through the presentation. Very simple, very straightforward. I saw you. I observed you doing something. That's the D, describe. The next step, which is E for explain, is about so what. So as Trevor was presenting and I saw you discussing the points with the person sat next to you, so what? What happened was Trevor was distracted from the presentation and other people in the room weren't really sure who to focus in on. So it distracted people. It caused the presentation to slow down. It interrupted the meeting because people weren't sure where to put their attention. And therefore it created a negative aspect of the meeting. It wasn't the right time to be discussing and talking because it distracted people around the table and Trevor was unhappy. It was unhappy that he was being interrupted and therefore that's quite rude. So the impact, what was the impact? Typically this could be quite an emotive thing and be emotive about it. Share frustrations because if you don't it won't be authentic. So if you were personally impacted by it, you were frustrated. You were frustrated because the presentation was at a really important point where we wanted to get the influence, get the sign off, and as you started talking, it disrupted the flow. It stopped us getting that. It lessened the impact. I saw you discussing a point with the person next to you whilst Trevor was going through the presentation. The impact of that was we didn't get the points across as crisply as we could because people were distracted and certainly the person sat next to you stopped paying attention to the presentation altogether. The third step, as mentioned earlier, is S for state. Really simple but often massively overlooked. What do you want the individual to do differently, or ask them what you would expect them to do differently? Now this will depend on, sometimes feedback is enough for people to go, I hadn't realised that I'd had that impact and therefore next time I will, which is absolutely fine. Whether you say it or whether the individual says it, we must state very clearly what the expected outcome, the expected level of performance. So when we're in presentations in the future, I expect you to make notes of anything you wish to discuss and then share your discussion with the wider group. And if that discussion is only for one of the individuals in the room, I expect you to find a time that's more appropriate when the presenter isn't presenting. So there will be opportunity for questions, there will be opportunity for discussion outside or within the presentation, and they'll be highlighted by the presenter. Explain that very clearly. And sometimes that will be, I do not expect to see you speaking when somebody else is speaking in a meeting. Simple, really simple. But don't think the other person can read your mind and know what good looks like. If they'd known that the first time, the situation might not have arisen at all. The last point that we're going to cover then is clarify. Clarify is all about the positive impact the change will make for them as an individual, for you as an individual, or for the team or the business. Whichever it is, we need to be very clear. So in clarify is the consequence, the outcomes of that. So by listening in the meeting, it allows the team to get their point across. It will allow Trevor to complete his presentation. And we have no doubt that the point you were making to the person sat next to you is relevant and important because you wanted to make it. And therefore we can all hear that point, which raises your stature in the meeting as somebody who's got an awful lot to add to the outcome, to the argument, to the discussion, rather than somebody who wants to have a side discussion and doesn't want to have that wider. So let's be really clear. Let's clarify that behaviour and then positive impacts of them behaving differently. And that's Desc. It seems really simple, but I would give one word of caution when using any feedback model, and Desc specifically. It's not something I would recommend you do on the fly unless you've practiced in the past, because for it to work, the person firstly needs to appreciate that you're doing this for them. It's about them as much as it is for other colleagues. So you're giving them that feedback so that they can make a positive change to create positive outcomes or to prevent negative outcomes, which is also a positive change. There's a certain amount of authenticity in that. The person needs to understand that you've got their best intents at heart, that you're helping them to perform better, and that relationship's really important. And if you get it wrong and haven't thought it through, so you're not clearly describing what you observed, you haven't formulated an explanation as to the impact of it, you can't state what you want them to change, any of that is slightly ambiguous, any of that comes across as insincere or trite, don't bother, because the person's not going to learn anything and it will just create friction. So when using Desc, think about how am I going to clearly articulate without question, clearly articulate. Not, well, when I saw you doing that, you wouldn't really interrupt. You kind of started talking, and I mean I couldn't really hear you, but I'm sure some of the forget that. That's not Desc, and that is not feedback. That's flim-flam. Do not do flim-flam. Be very clear. I observed you doing X. The impact of that was Y. The difference I want you to make is Z, and that will equal pi r squared, whatever that might be. Make it a very simple, clear set of D, describe, E, explain, S, state, and C, clarify. Thanks for watching.